These 5 deals didn't just change Canada's future, they exposed just how fragile America's dominance really is. Imagine your morning coffee costing 20% more overnight. That's what US companies faced when tariffs hit, while Canada quietly rewrote the rules. While Trump doubled down on tariffs and threats, Canada made its quiet move, a $213 billion global pivot, opening new doors in Asia, Europe, and Latin America. The result? A series of strategic wins that caught everyone off guard. If you thought the trade war was loud, wait until you see the real shock. We'll start with Coca-Cola's $200 million aluminum shock. Corporate exodus isn't just a headline, it's what unfolded as American tariffs hit. Coca-Cola's CEO, James Quincy, put a number on it. $200 million in extra annual costs thanks to the new 50% US tariff on imported aluminum. Canada supplies 44% of US aluminum imports, making it the obvious refuge. When your aluminum costs spike by hundreds per ton, you look for stability. Enter Canada. That's why Coca-Cola started actively exploring production north of the border, hoping to sidestep the tariff hit and keep soda prices from jumping even higher for American consumers. PepsiCo and the big beer companies faced the same math. Analysts reported that Molson Coors shifted its US-destined cans to Canadian bottling lines to dodge the 50% tariff on aluminum. AB InBev, with its existing Canadian operations, could do the same. For these companies, moving production wasn't about making a statement, it was about survival. The supply chain redraw happened almost overnight, with companies reworking contracts and logistics to keep their shelves stocked and prices competitive. It wasn't just drinks. Canadian Tire shifted almost a fifth of its orders from US suppliers to Europe, insulating itself from American supply chain chaos. Amazon Canada quietly expanded its fulfillment network near the border, with warehouse capacity up 28% according to their own data. US shoppers found themselves ordering from Canadian warehouses because the prices were better and the shipping was faster. Even in tech, industry experts say some firms eyed Canadian rail routes to cut double-digit tariff costs, though major moves remain unconfirmed. No one made a big announcement about moving to Canada. They just did it, opening warehouses, rerouting contracts, and keeping the flow of goods alive. While Washington argued about trade wars, the actual trade shifted north. But this wave of corporate moves was only the beginning. Canada was already working on its next move, one that would quietly reshape the auto industry and leave Washington watching from the sidelines. Volkswagen's $20 billion St. Thomas battery plant is more than a headline, it's a blueprint. Ontario wrote a 100% Canadian supply chain directly into the contract, using CETA and EU battery quotas to guarantee that every step, from northern lithium mines to the assembly line, stays in Canada. US suppliers are locked out by design, not by accident. The impact goes beyond the factory floor. This single plant secures over 3,000 direct jobs, with tens of thousands more supported in Ontario's mining and clean tech sectors. The value doesn't just pass through, it stays put. The entire output is set for Europe. Batteries roll off the line outside London, Ontario, get loaded onto trains to Montreal, and then shipped straight across the Atlantic. There's no detour through Michigan or Ohio. No cross-border assembly. That's a sharp break from the old model, where auto parts cross the US-Canada border half a dozen times before becoming a finished product. Trump's 25% steel tariffs made that old system too risky. Ontario's response was to build something the US couldn't touch. The government put up $700 million in grants, matched by another $700 million from Ottawa. The money comes with strings. Every nickel, lithium, and cobalt molecule must come from Canadian soil, refined in Sudbury and sent south to St. Thomas. That keeps the jobs, profits, and leverage inside Canada. And with no US components, there's no risk of American tariffs or supply chain disruptions. Energy costs pushed the deal over the line. Ontario's electricity grid is 60% nuclear, 25% hydro, and 15% renewables, and it costs about 30% less than in Ohio or Pennsylvania. Volkswagen locked in rates for a decade, sidestepping the political risk that comes with US incentives or policy changes. European executives saw the numbers. No translation needed. Ontario's model is now attracting firms beyond auto, but the real leverage comes from something even more basic than batteries or cars. For some US states, the question isn't who builds their cars, it's who keeps their lights on. New York depends on Canadian electricity. Roughly 20% of its power is drawn from Quebec's hydro dams. That's not a backup. It's built into the grid. When Ontario put a 25% surcharge on electricity exports, targeting Michigan and New York, US utilities paid an extra $300,000 every day. They didn't have a choice. If the flow stopped, blackouts would start within days. Quebec's hydro reservoirs have enough stored energy to power New England for months. The contracts are written to Canada's advantage. Prices adjust automatically when trade gets tense. During the softwood lumber dispute, Quebec added a clause tying electricity rates to US tariffs. When the US raised lumber duties, Boston's power bills jumped 18% overnight. That wasn't an accident. It was leverage, spelled out in the contract. Michigan's auto plants rely on Ontario's nuclear and hydro grid. Just one reactor at the Bruce facility powers more factories than all of Ohio's coal plants combined. The difference is in the numbers. Ontario's electricity costs about 30% less per kilowatt hour than what utilities pay in Ohio or Pennsylvania. That's a big reason Ford moved battery production to Windsor. Subsidies matter, but energy costs made US sites non-starters. The Canadian Chamber of Commerce warned that a full power cutoff could trigger a $50 billion trade war. When Minnesota tried to renegotiate its hydro contracts, Quebec's answer was blunt: keep the terms or risk outages. Minnesota backed down within a week. This isn't about turning off the lights. It's about who controls the switch. Canada's clean, reliable grid, dominated by nuclear and hydro, gives it leverage no US tariff can touch. That kind of power doesn't just shape contracts. It sets the stage for the next round of negotiations, ones that don't end with a handshake. At the Alberta G7 summit, Canada drew a clear line. Mark Carney, as host, scrapped the final communique, the first time since 1975 that leaders left without one. He replaced it with a chair summary, making sure nobody could pretend there was unity behind Trump's trade war. That move was deliberate. Carney's team had prepared for Trump's attempts to control the agenda, rehearsing countermoves and sticking to facts when Trump pushed tariffs. When Carney interrupted Trump's press conference, it wasn't about theatrics. French President Macron called out Canada's leadership as US influence slipped. The fracture was obvious. Canada, the EU, Japan, France, Germany, and Italy all pushed back, leaving Trump isolated. Retaliation threats followed. Canada made it clear, if talks failed, it would target US dairy, softwood lumber, and aluminum. At the same time, Canada accelerated CETA free trade expansions with the EU and finalized a new Japan trade deal, making it clear there were other options on the table. WTO challenges were filed. The message was direct. Canada wasn't waiting for the US to come around. Zelensky's long meeting with Carney after the summit underscored Canada's growing influence, while Trump stood on the sidelines. Carney set a 30-day deadline for negotiations, forcing the US to respond to specific Canadian proposals. Washington didn't bring proposals of its own. During that window, Canada signed security agreements with Japan, expanded EU trade, and announced $4.3 billion in support for Ukraine. A $2.3 billion loan using interest from frozen Russian assets, and $2 billion in grants and aid. The summit wasn't just another meeting, it was a rupture in the old order. Canada used silence, Europe pushed back, and Asia built new alliances. The days of America calling every shot were over. That shift didn't just change diplomacy, it changed where the money started to flow. Foreign investment didn't just arrive in Canada, it accelerated. Foreign direct investment hit $50 billion USD, a 9% increase year over year, while US figures barely moved. German automakers didn't just set up assembly lines, they built out entire supply chains. Umior's $2.7 billion cathode plant in Kingston is funded by EU capital and designed to serve European factories directly, cutting the US out of the loop. Dutch pension funds made headlines when they invested directly in Ontario mining projects, a move to avoid the unpredictability of US trade policy. One fund manager said they wanted assets that wouldn't be hit with surprise tariffs. That confidence showed up in the numbers. Quebec's lithium refineries attracted $4 billion in new investment. Airbus shifted wing production from Alabama to Quebec, citing the political risk in the US. Their Montreal facility now handles work for A220 and A320 jets. US foreign direct investment dropped 28% in the same period. The OECD's Investment Confidence Index ranked Canada above the US for capital inflow, a first in decades. European firms didn't just open new offices, they moved R&D divisions. SAP shifted 300 jobs from Silicon Valley to Vancouver, citing visa stability. Ontario's government sent direct invitations to US manufacturers, promising tariff relief. One auto parts supplier calculated an $11 million annual savings just by moving across the Detroit River. French nuclear firms put $900 million into Saskatchewan's uranium mines after US export restrictions. Korean battery makers locked in Canadian lithium supply for the next decade. Canada's strategy didn't just attract investment, it rerouted the flow of global capital. Canada's $214 billion trade expansion, with deals across Asia, Europe, and Latin America, not the US, shows how quickly the landscape changed. That number includes agreements with Indonesia, the EU, Japan, and others. The Alberta G7 summit made one thing clear. If Washington keeps shifting the rules, allies will look elsewhere for stability. European investors moved into Canadian mines. German automakers set up new supply chains. Quebec's hydro kept US cities on the grid. Now the real question: can Washington restore predictability, or will allies continue to look north for stability? Tell me what you think in the comments. Can the US regain its footing, or is this shift permanent?